is so much fun. It's lovely to be here. I love this place. I went into the bathroom. It's really like going back to high school or something. It's very strange. That's when I saw the romance novels. If you have a chance. But Cary and I know each other. And we've done this a few times. And we seem to have at least as much fun as anyone listening to us, and oftentimes more. But anyways, it's really fun to be back. And yeah, I'm going to start reading a poem or two, and then I'm going to talk about why I started writing this new series, and then who knows, I'll read some of it. This is my first book of poetry. Is it okay if I walk around?
Yeah.
Can you all hear me?
I can hear.
Yeah, I have a good voice. And this is me a few years ago. Everybody's like, who is that strange woman? And this is Dodie, who's sitting right over there on the back. She's looking down. She's kind of hard to see. And our sister Robin took the picture. So this is a poem from when Dodie and I had the privilege and duty to go to Ireland with our mother, her two sisters, Duff and Pat, and another auntie, Teed, and cousin Ronnie, and then cousin Jim joined us. I think I'm saying everybody. So we rented, it was kind of a wild trip. We rented this van, and none of us, of course, had ever driven on the other side of the road. And it was only Dodie and I and Ronnie who were drivers. The aunties and mom always sat in the back, and they would be going, whoa, whoa, because they're from Montana. And so that means slow down, I guess. But anyways, it was a wonderful trip. And this is a poem that came out of it. It's called A Narrow Road. There's a road with only enough room for one car. If you meet another, you must stop, get out, and discuss who saw the last wide spot. On this small road is a church with a graveyard, the bones in some quarters piled up of families on families. The others left this country of peat fighters and oiled wool and sweet music when the potatoes turned black as they were pulled from the ground and the good food was shipped to England. They went on creaking ships, coffin ships, they crammed on and hoped. And they dreamed of clouds of deep cream, beds of down, and grandchildren who would have children, who would someday drive down the narrow roads of a green, green country to find out what had been left behind. So, if you haven't gathered, I'm of Irish descent. And I always knew it, but then what happened, so I had written a couple standalone mysteries, and I had written, I think, a couple of the Claire Watkins mysteries. And my mother wasn't doing too well, and she and I were in the car driving Gavin away, and she turned to me and she said, Mary, I think you really should write a book about your grandmother, my mother. And I was like, oh yeah, that is a great idea. I just cannot tell you how much I want to do that. But then she got me, because then she died. So then I felt obliged. But then the Minnesota Historical Society had a grant, and the grant was for people doing research that would lead to a book about women, who was a woman, and who was a worker. Well, my grandmother was the postmistress of Chicago, Minnesota, so she fit the bill, and I was given the grant. And this is my grandmother, May Kerwin. And actually, there's a picture on the back that's really sweet. It's me and my grandmother when I'm teeny tiny. So I just had so much fun working on this book. My grandmother died when I was 9, so I didn't really know her very well, and she kind of scared me. She was used to bossing people around. I mean, she kind of ran the village, I think, as a postmistress often does, and knows everything. But anyway, my mother had always said you would have liked well, she died when I was 9 or 12, I can't remember, but young, and so I never got to know her really as an adult. And so it was really fun to do all this research, and what I learned 2 things that will segue into why I started this new series. One was that I absolutely love research. It is just so much fun. I just love, you go down the rabbit holes and then you pull yourself out and say, kind of get hold of yourself and say, now back to work. In fact, it might even be good if you wrote something. But, in fact, I found another Mary Logue while I was doing research. Yeah, she just kind of stumbled into the picture, and then she went off to Montana. I did follow her for a little while, but Logue is an unusual name. It is Irish. The Logues were from Donegal, and there was an Archbishop Logue when James Joyce wrote Ulysses. But anyway, so first of all, I learned I really love doing research. And the second thing I learned was there was a moment when I was working on the book of my grandmother when I found our great-great-grandparents on the boat manifest coming from Galway to New York. And it was just so interesting, that moment of seeing their names written down like this really happened. I mean, it's sometimes you just think it's just another story, and then you realize, no, these were real people that came over, and it made me place myself more clearly in their shoes. And I just kept thinking, what could be the equivalent to what my ancestors did coming here from Ireland? What could be that equivalent? And all I could come up with was going to Mars, I think would be just about as strange as what they did. I'm not going to, so the first book is the Streel, and the Streel is a lovely word that Mom used for us girls when we were going out at night and she didn't think we were dressed appropriately. So she would look at us and go, oh, you can't go out like that, you look like a Streel. Well, when I was doing research for the book on my grandmother, I looked the word up in the Oxford English Dictionary. It is Gaelic, and it means basically slut. So thank you, Mother. But I don't know that she knew what it meant exactly. I mean, I knew what it meant. I mean, you could tell by the tone of her voice. But it was interesting, then I also found that I had other Gaelic words in my vocabulary that I didn't know were Gaelic. I just thought everybody used them. And then copy editors would come back to me and go, what are you talking about? I used the word a skiff of snow. And they thought, oh, that's so poetic, a boat of snow. Well, no, in Gaelic it means a very thin covering of snow. So Mom used that word quite frequently. Okay, so I had written 9 books in the Claire Watkins mystery series set down on Lake Pepin, and I had gotten them all settled. My main character was the sheriff. Her daughter had gone off to college. Claire was married to Rich, happily ever after. So I felt like it was time to do to turn my hands in some other direction. And again, this was happening at kind of the same time that I had written the book on my grandmother. So I thought, well, I'll write a book that features a girl that is 16 and has to leave Ireland, as they did. And in fact, in the first book, The Streel, it opens with a wake, because she and her brother Seamus are going to America, and they will probably never see them again. So this was what the Irish did. They would have wakes for them. And I just want to pass this around too. So as I'm working on the Streel, I found this tin type of And when I found it looked so much like my main character, Bridget Reardon. She could be our sister. And it was used for the cover, but it's kind of nice to see the whole thing because the art directors got their hands on it. And I like what they did, but it did definitely change it. So I had this idea too. Now, my grandmother lived in Chicago, which is by Morris, which is, almost to South Dakota. And I had followed my ancestors coming that far. And so I was really curious, I just was so interested in what it would have been like for the Europeans to be coming and exploring and going across the country. So that's that's what I wanted to do in this book. And so I wrote, I have the whole series planned out, and I always have before I even started writing. So the second book just came out. It's called The Big Sugar, and it's set in Cheyenne. So the Streel is mainly set in Deadwood, South Dakota. So Bridget and her brother Seamus she goes to New York and works. She goes to St. Paul and works on Summit Avenue for a family very similar to the Hill family, and then she goes on to Deadwood, and then in The Big Sugar she goes on to Cheyenne. So I'm going to read just the opening of that. If I can, yeah. So in the Streel, I really wanted to give that sense of the Irishness of her. And one of the things I learned that the Irish did was they had prayers for every time of day. So they had prayers for milking the cow, and they had prayers for lighting the fire, and they had prayers for going to bed. And so I managed to get my hand on a Gaelic. I had trouble getting those prayers, so I finally from Notre Dame University got the Gaelic versions, and then I proceeded to translate them because I wanted those prayers in the book. So I used them kind of interspersed through the book. So I wanted to continue something like that with The Big Sugar, so I went and got an old-timey book of cowboy songs. So you might recognize the cadence of this song. I'm going to read just a little bit from part 1, Cheyenne. Sorry. I want to do justice to this. This cowboy song. Where the air is so pure, the zephyr is so free, the breeze is so balmy and light, that I would not exchange my home on the range for all the cities so bright. Oh, I love these wild flowers in this dear land of ours. The curlew I love to hear scream, and I love the white rocks and the antelope flocks that graze on the mountaintops green. So, anyways, I use those throughout the book. This is chapter 1, April 1881. When I stepped down from the Black Hills stagecoach onto the firm ground of our destination, Cheyenne, I thought my legs would give out from under me. During the past few days, I had used them so infrequently. Pedrick and I had finally arrived late in the afternoon of our 4th day of travel from Deadwood, with only one night stop to get out of the coach and rest in a bed. The horses were luckier than we were. They were changed every day. As we traveled across the plains, there were still remnants of old snow in the hollows, but the wind was blowing warm, a chinook, the driver called it. He assured us that the snow wouldn't last long. How glad I was to get sight of this new place, a booming town in the Wyoming Territory. After Deadwood, a small town tucked into the mountains, it felt good to be on wide streets with the sky above a huge blue canopy. I was working on being hopeful, praying that we would find our way in this frontier place, but once again, I felt totally out of my depths. Most important to me was to be reunited with my dear brother Seamus. He left Deadwood when he was accused of the murder of a saloon girl, his old fiancée. All we knew was that Cheyenne had been his destination. I wanted to give him the news that we had sold the mine and made a small fortune. The money had been wired to the Western Union office in Cheyenne and was waiting for us to sign for it. It was more money than we had ever known. Cheyenne might be a good place to spend some of that money if I ended up staying here for a time. The town was said to be up and coming, as the Union Pacific Railroad had recently arrived there from out east. This made Cheyenne an end-of-the-tracks town with a population close to 5,000 people, or so I had been told. Also, women who were older than 21 years and citizens of the territory now had the right to vote in the Wyoming Territory. When I reached that grand old age, I'd be happy to stand in line for this privilege. I wondered when the next election would be and what it would involve. No one start to think about the news today, okay? Okay. As I looked down the muddy thoroughfare, I saw building after building, most of them brick and at least two-story with mansard roofs. Wagon loads of goods were being driven down the streets, pulled by 2 to 4 horses, and people were crowding the sidewalks. A boom town indeed. Pedrick busied himself getting our luggage down from the upper racks of the stagecoach. We had not traveled light, taking with us all that we might need to set up life in a new town. I could hear the pots and pans clanging in the basket he put at my feet. Farther down the street, my eyes lit on an enormous brick building, the size of which I hadn't seen since I had worked in St. Paul, Minnesota. A veranda circled the front and the sides, half a story up from the wooden sidewalk. Rocking chairs lined the railing, and I saw a few men sitting in them, smoking cigars, with their broad-brimmed hats pushed back on their foreheads. Were they cowboys, I wondered? I was looking forward to seeing these wild men of the West. Cheyenne was called the Magic City of the Plains, and viewing that elegant building, I did not doubt the name. If only we would find some of that magic, and also my brother Seamus. It was rumored he had joined up with a bunch of cowhands who were stabled at a ranch just outside of Cheyenne. It was all I could do to not immediately start asking around for him. Instead, I turned and asked the stagecoach driver what that big grand building might be. Oh yeah, that's quite the place, I hear. Never been in it myself. It's the Cheyenne Club. Very swanky and exclusive to the big sugars around here. Only 200 are allowed to be members. It's a pretty fancy place for this rough and tumble town. But then, Cheyenne is the capital of this here territory. May anyone go into the club, I asked, curious to see its interior and wishing to see some civilization. Maybe I could go in and ask about Seamus. It seemed like the kind of place where people would be in the know. From what I've heard, you can only go in if you've got an invite from one of the big sugars. That was a term I had never heard before, but it rolled off his tongue like I should know it. And who are these big sugars? That's what they call the cattle barons around these parts. They're the fellows with the money, and I guess that makes them sweet. I wondered what chance I'd have to meet one of these big sugars and wrangle an invitation to that fancy club. Pedrick came up behind me and slid an arm around my shoulder. We're here. We made it. I want to just finish with one more poem. So, same trip. I have to tell you just a teeniest bit about my mother. So, she was a bit of a wild child in her youth, and she put herself through college by being a singing waitress in a restaurant downtown Minneapolis. So she sang all my growing up. She sang while we hang the sheets out on the line. She sang while she was peeling potatoes. And I've got her songbook that she must have used for that job. I found it when we were packing up the house. And I know almost all the songs because I remember her singing them. So anyway, my mom, Dodie and I went on the second trip, but the first trip that Mom and her 2 sisters went on, they called themselves the 3 Leprechauns. They were all about this tall. they tended to hit the pubs every night. And then they got to this one B&B in Kilishandra, and it was kind of out in the country, and they decided that they weren't going to go into the pub that night. We were just going to take it easy and kind of catch up. But the woman of the house, they normally only had fishermen that came to visit them, and she was so excited to have 3 women from America that they had to take them out to the pub that night. So they were at the pub every night. And I'm sure, I know, Mom was singing. She knew all the songs. So when we went there, we had to go to Kilishandra, and it turned out to be their music festival night. And I think there were like 3 or 4 taverns, pubs in the town, and they could stay open until midnight because it was a special event, a special time. So, and the other thing that's so cool about the way that music happens in a little pub in Ireland is that it's kind of almost organic. I mean, there's no stage, and everybody's just sitting around, and then all of a sudden somebody pulls out their fiddle and starts playing this song, and then his granddaughter picks up her little flute and starts going, and it just kind of comes together. And then they play a song or two, and then somebody sings a cappella. And then they say, "Hey, Roger, why don't you get up and tell the time about the cow got stuck in the mud? Tell that story." And so it would rotate. So it would be like music, song, story. And I felt very, very at home there. Dodie and I were called. The rumor was going around that we were from France. I don't know how that started. And also my hair was a little longer at that time, and at least this curly, and we became known as the girls with the hair in town. But anyways, this is the last poem in the book. We'll give you a little taste of what Kilishandra was like. It's called Song in Kilishandra. Toward the end, they ask Seamus to sing. An old man lifts a wee girl to his knee and gives her a taste of foamy Guinness. The rain teems through the night. We are safe. Seamus lifts the shoulders of his shirt, runs a finger down his thin nose, and then, like a wren, throws his head back and begins to sing the song that we all know. The words little changed, of loss and love, and loss and luck. And we hope so much and get so little. Something settles on us as we breathe in the smoke-plumed air. His voice flies in circles, and we watch as the bird batters his wings. If only a window would open, the sky would break, releasing his voice of trills and valleys. Seamus sings the song that our mothers taught us, and our fathers hummed, coming home in the dark. Thanks. I have to say something now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I know this guy, and and
don't.
no, not that. No, I won't. Not that one. No, so Cary came to me, and I worked on. Was it Wolves? The first story?
Wolves was the first one.
Yeah. And then things happened, and he got his story published. Was it Wolves that was in the paper? It was, wasn't it? Or
no,
was it
yeah, what became Cougar Club. It was Savage, Minnesota.
So then Cougar, and I had seen that at least. I don't think I had worked on it. But anyways, so then he hooked up with Adventure Keen, and he had 2 more books using the same character, kind of mysteries, but very, very much set in the wild. And they asked me to be the editor, and so I was delighted. I was really excited. And so I heard about all 4 books. So I knew about wolves, I knew about cougars, monarchs. I'm like, how is he going to do this? And then fish, but what was...
Dead catch.
Dead catch, yeah. So I kind of got the fish one, but the monarchs really stumped me. And man, oh man, did he pull it off. It is so cool how he flies monarchs into the book. So.
I don't really need to add anything after that. No, I wanted to thank Magers and Quinn for hosting this event.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, one of my favorite bookstores. Great bookstore. If you buy any books here, you can buy Mary's, of course, here. But buy books from Magers and Quinn. We want them to be. They've been here for a long time. We want them to be here for a long time, and they've been very gracious in giving us this venue. So thank you very much. I'm going to keep it pretty brief tonight. I'm going to read very briefly from my latest Sam
Are you
Rivers.
insinuating that I went on?
No, not at all. I should read some poems.
Go ahead.
Anyway, I'll keep it very brief. I'm going to read briefly, talk a little bit about what it was like editing with Mary. Talk a little bit about the Sam Rivers mysteries and what I have in store for them, and then a little bit about the books that I have coming out over the next year. So we'll start out again with, there are a couple of tropes that they use and they typically use in mysteries. You've done some of this too.
A little bit.
A little bit, and which one of them is you always start with a body. And for all three of these that have been published, the latest Killing Monarchs, I begin with a body. The guy doesn't know it in the first and second chapter of Killing Monarchs, but eventually he becomes a body. And the other trope that you almost always do in writing a mystery is you don't let too many pages happen before you introduce your main hero. And my main hero, my main guy, is Sam Rivers. These are the Sam Rivers mysteries. So it's true on chapter 3, it opens with an introduction of Sam Rivers, and I'm going to read that briefly. In the darkened room, Sam Rivers flashed the photo of an Oyamel fir onto the screen. The tree was 70 feet tall, and every branch, twig, and frond were covered with monarch butterflies, transforming the normally deep green fir into orange-skirted brilliance. The kids and a few parents exclaimed with awe. Sam heard an incredible ooh, and then Mac McCollum, his portly fellow special agent, who had squeezed himself into one of the undersized children's desks, said, "Whoa!" loud enough to eclipse everyone. Mac never held back. Sam stood in front of the class in his official khaki greens, wearing work boots, the boots at an inch to a 6'2" height. His black hair was cropped short with hints of gray at the temples. There was a small scar over his right eye and another on his left hand, remnants of altercations in the field. The scars and 2-day beard growth gave him a rugged look, but everyone was staring at the screen. To give the monarch-filled tree a sense of scale, a Mexican wildlife agent, Miguel Verde, stood at the bottom of the tree, dwarfed by the massive orange brushstroke towering above him. Sam explained the tree full of butterflies marked the end of one of the most extraordinary migrations in nature. It was an hour climb up the mountain to reach this place, Sam said. On the way up, we began seeing butterflies, just a few at first, then more the further we climbed. After a half hour, the air started filling with them, more and more filling the trees until we finally came to several trees like this one up top. Sam broke off, remembering the scene. He turned and peered at the 12-year-olds, Mac, and a few parents. You remember the first time you saw something different in nature? Something unique and remarkable? The moment I saw this tree was like that, magical. It made me feel alive in a way I wasn't feeling before I saw it. Sam wasn't sure the adults understood, but a small blonde girl with pigtails and glasses sat in the front row and stared at the screen as though hypnotized. Several of her classmates peered with similar intensity. Sam Rivers had always felt a visceral appreciation for wild places. He still remembered seeing his first wolf, moose, bear, and rare woodland caribou. He had been raised in northern Minnesota, and the one thing he knew for certain was that special manifestations of flora and fauna had always summoned a state of reverence that made him feel, for a few stolen moments, grace and awe. That's just one of the things Sam, special agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, appreciated about being in the wild. Now, that's my introduction to Sam Rivers, and if you read between the lines, Sam Rivers, by vocation, he's a special agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. By education, he's a wildlife biologist. And by avocation, he's always been interested in wilderness and wild places and the plants and animals that inhabit it. But each of the novels that have been out, if you read a Sam Rivers novel like Wolf Kill, you'll learn something about wolf biology. Cougar Claw is about the alleged predation of a prominent savage Minnesota businessman by a mountain lion, and Sam is asked to come examine the scene to bless it as in fact a natural predation. Of course, he goes and he examines the scene and he recognizes things that have happened that are sort of anomalous, not true with regard to animal behavior, especially for mountain lions. And because of those anomalies, he uncovers, he begins to recognize that a crime has been committed. In Killing Monarchs, I want to stress that no monarchs were actually killed. The writing of this book, although I really like that cover. There is a drug cartel in Michoacan, Mexico, in the book, called Los Monarcas, the monarchs, more about kings then, and they're the ones that do the killing. But because, again, Sam Rivers has been down to Michoacan, Mexico, to the monarch butterfly preserves, and he understands the monarch butterfly life cycle, he recognizes that there's something a little odd about shipping boxes of monarch chrysalises to schools in the upper Midwest, where they have units on metamorphosis. They actually do this. Shipping him in the upper Midwest from Michoacan, Mexico, that's a little odd. He can't quite figure out why at first. But because of that anomalous fact, he begins to uncover a crime. And that's really what these books are about. Now, before I get to working with Mary, let me tell you, there's a fourth Sam Rivers book coming out, and there's another fifth one that I'm working on now.
What creature is in that?
Rattlesnakes.
Oh, yes!
That one's called Rattlesnake Bluff, and it's set down in southeastern Minnesota. But before that, Dead Catch will be out, and I think it'll be out next June, though it may be out sooner because they actually have the manuscript and it has to go through their editing cycle, so it may happen sooner. And then following that, Rattlesnake Bluff. I also write nonfiction, like Mary. I write books about wilderness. So my first book, Lost in the Wild, was about 2 survival stories that happened in northern Minnesota in the Boundary Waters. My second book, Opening Goliath, was about a wild cave in southeastern Minnesota. My third book came out in 2018, Gunflint Burning, about the Hand Lake Fire of 2007. My fourth nonfiction book is coming out in December from the University of Minnesota Press. It's called, I kind of think of it as a prequel to Gunflint Burning. It's called Gunflint Falling. It's, how many people here remember on July 4th, 99, there was a massive windstorm that happened up in the Boundary Waters, flattened 48 million trees. Well, I found people that were impacted by it, and I kind of tell their story and the story of how the storm unfolded and what happened to those people in the search and rescue and the recovery that happened in the days and weeks following that event in Gunflint Falling. So I kind of think that the Ham Lake fire in 2007 burned as hot and intense as it did because of the blowdown that happened in July 4th. That's why I kind of call it the prequel. Working with Mary As I've said this before about being here, it's been a real honor and privilege, and she's edited every one of all 4 of the Sam Rivers novels, and I'm sure she'll do it more. What happened was Adventure Keen published Wolves, my first book, and I didn't like the cover, I didn't like the way it was marketed, I didn't like a lot of the things they did with it. I loved the way she edited the first 100 pages of that. But that taught them a couple things. They didn't know how to market a book, Adventure Keen. They're a big publisher. They publish nature guides like the wildflowers of Minnesota or the cacti of Arizona. They do it in all 50 states. It's quite a good business for them. But they don't know how to publish mysteries or fiction, and they recognize that. So after a while, when the rights for Savage, Minnesota, which was serialized in the Star Tribune, came back to me, I reached out to Adventure Keen and said, would you like to publish a revised version of Savage, Minnesota? Because it appeared every day in the paper from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and to shoehorn it into that, you probably remember this, because she had a book novel serialized in the strip too. To do that, they had to make such drastic edits to the book that it really needed work. And so I reached out to Adventure Keen, and they came back and said a couple things. They said, we'd love to do that. Moreover, we agree with you about Wolves. Let's work on Wolves. Let's republish it as a separate book. We'll give it a better cover. We'll market it, but we don't really know how to edit fiction. Would you know anybody that knows how to edit mystery fiction? No. I'd worked with Mary before, and editing the first 100 pages of Wolves, and I said, let's talk to Mary Logue, and then they reached out to you, and they contracted with her, and she's been great to work with. To give you an example of Wolf Kill, this was the first Sam Rivers novel. It was about 110,000 words. We wanted to get it under 100,000. Somewhere I feel like a novel's sweet spot is 80 to 100,000 words. So it was about 110,000 words, and I handed it off to Mary, and she gave it some great suggestions throughout. A lot of line edits, a lot of deletions and stuff, but not enough deletions to cut out 10% of the book. One of the things she said to me was, Cary, what you need to do is start the action in every chapter sooner and end the chapter earlier. and I thought, what kind of advice? Come on. But with that in mind, I started reading those chapters, and I'll be damned, I can begin with lots of extraneous detail when I begin,
It's for you. A lot of that's for you.
Yes. Yeah.
You need it to,
Cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Cut it. So I did cut about, and we got under 100,000, thanks to you. And that was just one example of how if you read one of these novels and you think it's passably readable or it's good, it's in large part because of Mary Logue. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Wow. I was wondering what you were going to say, what gems of wisdom I had said to you. And I liked that. It is so interesting that people miss their beginnings and endings,
Yeah.
And we're so used to movies now, and we're so used to jumping that, we don't need to know she got her purse and she got the keys for the car and then she got, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we don't need that trail off.
Yeah, and especially when it's your own book, you're kind of myopic about it.
Right.
You need that other opinion, and Mary has been seriously indispensable in doing that. That's all I have. Should we open it up for questions?
Yeah.
Any questions? Yeah.
I'm interested, just following up on the the editing, so the publisher said cut 10%?
No, the
Is that-
publisher didn't. I
Oh.
kind of feel like the sweet spot of a novel is 80 to 100,000. Anyway, we have Pete Houtman here.
Hi.
Who has won lots of awards, written lots of books. Don't you, I mean, I know you're more YA, but you've written some adult novels. Do you feel like 80,000 is about right? 100,000 more?
I always shoot for about 60,000 and end up with about 80.
Okay.
Personally, I like short novels.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. And I don't think any of these are as few words as 80, but yeah, I try to keep them under that. I think they were willing to go with 110, but you know, I think Mary read it and thought that it was, you know, it was a little bulky. And it was. And it's a better novel.
It is funny though, I mean, people seem to think if it's longer, it's better. I think some mystery readers do that,
Yeah.
you know.
And then later you can do the director's cut and blow it up to about 100.
Well, and you know, there are some hefty tomes out there.
Oh.
One my wife just finished, Abraham Verghese's
Oh.
Covenant of Water.
Right.
Wow.
Well, and look at Elizabeth George's book right there. I think it's, can you pull that one out there? How many pages is that,
yeah.
that one?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I think it's her last book in this series, but I mean, Peter gave me that for Christmas and I love her. I like her work, but man,
You haven't read it.
I don't really.
You know, I loaned the Covenant of Water to a friend, and she gave it back to me because she could not profit on her treadmill.
I thought you were gonna say up in bed.
Yeah.
Where did your detective character arrive from? How did that?
You know, I began writing Wolves quite a while ago, and I took a class from the Loft, Mary Gardner, who's since passed away, novelist. And you know, she gave me the idea. I was writing about wolves, and she gave me the idea of having a protagonist that was somehow involved with wolves. And you know, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they police the endangered species list, and that's how the connection happened with Sam Rivers and and that's usually how he ends up getting involved in something. He's asked to weigh in, or in Killing Monarchs, he happens to just be in the school when there's a drug overdose of a janitor, so he kind of gets pulled in. In the latest one, Dead Catch, it's a little different. He's got an old childhood friend who's a real nefarious character that's asked him to get involved because he's been accused of murder. So, but anyway, usually that sort of, Sam Rivers is the guy who understands wilderness issues and wildlife, and that's how he gets involved.
Well, and I just think it's kind of brilliant because, you know, I think a lot of mystery readers want more than just a good plot. I mean, what I hear a lot of times is they want to learn something. They want, and to have someone who, you know, to be able to drop in that stuff about what a wolf does, how a cougar behaves in a fighting situation or whatever. I mean, you don't have to explain why that person might happen to know that. You know what I mean? You've got that knowledge sitting there. And so, and also using it. I mean, that's what I think is just so cool, is that you know, your character, and I assume therefore you, know so much about how someone could look at a scene that I would think was, you know, a cougar killing or whatever, and realize that things aren't just quite gelling, you know. So you're really hitting, you know, you've got someone in command and you've got someone who's knowledgeable, you
Yeah, I mean, you say you love research. I love researching too, but I really enjoy researching about monarch butterflies and you know, what I try to do in these novels is I try to be factually accurate with regard to the wildlife stuff, you know, but not explain it in too many details.
Right, right.
You've helped me cut stuff out that have had too many details. Yeah, Steve.
When you wrote Wolfkill was your first Sam Rivers book, correct?
Uh-huh.
How much of that book did you know before you met Sam Rivers? Or was he a character that you had in mind when you went looking for a story from him?
I didn't have, I remember the day I rode home from work
I love this.
over lunchtime. I was always stealing time because I had two young sons at the time. So I raced home over lunch, and these awful pursuits. I just sat down and started writing, and I wrote about this. They were called the Iron County Gun Club. That was the name of the novel for quite a while. They were just terrible men, you know, just awful people. And I don't know where it came from, but it really intrigued me. And I thought, these guys, we gotta find out what happens to these guys. And that was sort of the genesis for that thing. So I didn't really, out of that, it sort of grew. So I didn't have all the details around it at all. Just I wrote and wrote and wrote, and, you know, I wrote a lot of stuff that didn't. Now I try to at least write a treatment of something, or kind of a prosaic outline of what the story is. I try to figure out as much as I can before I start writing.
So what part of writing the book is hard for you? I mean, do you have trouble with the opening? Do you have trouble with the middle? Do you have trouble with the end? I'm always curious about that because people are very different about that.
Well, I mean, this is the fifth one I'm working on now. It's more the plot for me.
Yeah.
I really want to kind of nail down, not, you know, they say among novelists there's pantsers and plotters.
Right.
People who
Yeah.
plot or people who write by the seat of their pants. I think that first novel I was writing by the seat of my pants,
Mhm.
but now I'm much more of a plotter, but I don't want to fill in so many details that it, you know, I can't have something just occur to me while I'm writing, you know, in a fit of creativity.
I think it's just like life. I mean, you know, you think you know where you're going. You think you know what you want. And then you hopefully are flexible for what lands in your lap.
Yeah,
You
what
know what I
comes
mean?
along? Yeah, I mean, what,
yeah.
so do you plot out?
You know, I have tried to literally do like a plot outline, cause I think it sounds kinda cool. But what happens to me is I do the plot outline, and then I start writing, and I get about 3 chapters in, and it's all changed. Like I'm not following the plot outline. So then I have to redo the plot outline. So now what I do is I only plot out 3 chapters
Okay,
at a
but wait,
time.
now that's interesting, but
Yeah.
on the other side, don't, you know the arc of the
I
story.
think I know the arc of the story.
Okay.
Yes, I do,
Yeah.
I do. And I also have, I worked with a guy who was a futurist, and he had this way of kind of looking at the future, and if this happened, then what would that mean, and what would that mean, and what would that mean? So I took it and I made what I call the murder ring. So in the center you have the crime.
The murder.
Who's killed or what crime happens. And then you have spokes going out to who could have done it. And then you have spokes going out from them why they couldn't have done it. And then you have spokes going out why they probably did do it. And then you go out a little further. Well, now when I do that, which I'm going to do for my next book, cause it's set it's set in a polygamous family, and we're gonna wanna know who killed the husband, which wife. It's funny stuff. But anyway, so if I do that, then I kind of can see, it doesn't mean I'm gonna do all of
No.
it. I don't have to use all that
No,
information.
that is really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, what is, that's like a
What
plot
do I
wheel.
call them? A murder wheel, I call it.
A
You're right.
murder,
You're
yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I'm gonna patent that.
How
that
big is a
really
sheet of paper?
Yeah. That is a cool idea, and that, but again, it sort of gives you the holistic
Yeah.
view of, and you know, that another thing you said, which I think is really true, and it's probably true for you too, Rose. Rose just came out with a novel, that you tend to write. You know, Peter Guy talks about writing a Bible for the book, and you'll write a lot of stuff that just never gets in the book. You'll write about characters and mannerisms and stuff, and they may not get in the book at all. But you know, that,
need them. See, and that's
Yeah.
what I was saying before. It's like we sometimes need to write stuff just so we know it, but once we know it, it's kind of boring.
yeah, kind of extreme. Yes, that was exactly.
Yeah, so we can skip that part,
Yeah.
but we know it.
Mhm.
I think it really makes a difference too, how well we know the world that we're writing about.
Yes.
You know? And people ask me a lot about how much research. I mean, I really do. I always go to where I'm writing about, and with Bridget, and I really do a lot. I read the books that she would have read in 1880. I read the books about that time period. I read the ladies' magazines that came out, so I know.
Wow. So have you been assaulted?
Not yet. Well, no, but I got it on my calendar. Yeah. But I'm reading some very interesting books. A friend of mine gave me this big, thick volume, leather, and across the top, polygamy. And it's like from 1900.
Oh wow.
I know. And the other thing
It's a
about the
manual.
The other thing about the polygamists, well, of the Mormons, I should say, is that they were actually kind of as part of their spiritual path were told to keep diaries. And so there's just a lot of information out there, yeah.
that'd be
And a lot of the women went, because Bridget will be going to Salt Lake right as Utah wants to join the union, and that's why they have to give up polygamy. And so she'll be there right when that's happening, and a lot of the women did not want to give it up, which I find they actually, did protested and did some speeches and stuff like that. And I was so glad that I could read some of that, because again, you get kind of blinders, and you don't realize, for some women, hey, he's yours now,
Any other yeah, Jane.
I know that Mary makes beautiful hook rubs,
Thank you.
and there's a whole process of doing that. And the fact that you're a writer and you also do that, is there some connection, or you changed your way of writing or rug hooking or something?
I would say the connection is more the way they live in my mind before I do much about them. I think it kind of freaks some people out, but I often work on a book in my head, taking no notes for about a year before I write anything down. And often with rug hooking, I have a new idea about a puffin. I want to do a puffin, but I've decided I want to do a series of puffins, and in each rug, the puffin gets changed as it gets more geometric or more vague or more scattered, or but I haven't done it. I mean, I haven't sketched, I haven't done anything. So it's more, that's how they feel the same to me, is how much brain activity they take up. I mean, I'll be like driving down I have a house in Stockholm, Wisconsin. It's an hour and a half, it's a perfect length of time to get a lot of thinking done, but I get like dialogue, I get scenes but and if they stay with me, at some point I'll use them, but they're there, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Funny story, one of the first times we ever did anything together, she got up there and read poems and did a few of those. She says, you know, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm a hooker. And I got up and I said, I didn't know her. And she explained she hooks rugs.
Thanks, Jane. I
That's
have
been
to
one of
keep
the
my
most
hands busy.
frequently repeated jokes.
No, I know. I was gonna do it tonight, but I don't know.
Wasn't there a club called the Hookers?
Excuse me?
Wasn't there a club called the Hookers?
Well, there is a group called the Hookers, yeah.
That's- yeah.
The visual aspect, and then welcoming is very visual, obviously.
Right.
Because you're making the artwork. So there's a visual connection, and then, in that regard, does that affect your,
You know,
in your descriptions
yeah.
or something?
Maybe a little bit, but the thing I'm thinking about most clearly was I did a residency in Iceland where I was just hooking. I mean, I was making rugs in Iceland. And, but I'd had this idea for a novel, and I knew it was about a 12-year-old boy and his grandfather, and that there was something in the basement and he wasn't supposed to go down in the basement. And I knew what was in the basement. So then I get to Iceland and I'm at the textile center and we go into this museum and I see this beautiful carved box with the dragon. A dreki is what they're called in Iceland. And then that was it. That was my dragon. I knew it was a dragon in the basement, and then the whole story came to me. So there I am, again, hooking all day, but then I would literally get up, wake up, and take my computer and put it on my lap and write. So I wrote like 3 or 4 chapters of that, but it set in Iceland. That was the other thing. So they do influence each other, yeah. And also, I had this, it was so interesting, in my first book, one of the complaints I got on Amazon, one of the reviews, was by a guy, and he said, way too much stuff about clothes and hair. And so in this book, in The Big Sugar, clothes are how she solves the mystery. I will say no more, but so take that.
Yeah.